And we're live. Assalamualaikum and a very good day to all present today. Welcome to the first round of English debate competition, InterVarsity Science E-Debate Challenge 2021. The motion for this debate is, in light of the short film Save Ralph, the House regret the use of animal and scientific research. I will be the chairperson and the timekeeper for Room 6. Let me now introduce the debaters for you. Acting as the government team for this debate is a team from Uniten with Mr. Muiz as the Prime Minister and also the government whip, and Mr. Amar as the Deputy Prime Minister. Acting as the opposition team for this debate is a team from UTHMB with Ms. Michi as the opposition leader, Mr. Amir as the second opposition speaker, and Mr. Tanadon as the opposition whip. Our panel of adjudicator consists of Mr. Muhammad Ajay from Before we begin, I will briefly explain the rules. The first one is sensitive issues related to religion, racism, and touching a person's personality are prohibited. The use of Quranic verses and hadiths to strengthen arguments is strictly prohibited. Each debater may speak for 7 minutes. The reply speech is 4 minutes. Time will begin to count as the debater begins to speak. The bell will be rung once at the end of the first minute to indicate that POIs are allowed to be asked by the opposing bench. Meanwhile, at the end of the 6th minute, the bell will be rung once to indicate that the time allocated for POIs has ended. The bell will be rung twice at the end of the 7th minute to indicate that the debater's time has expired. For the reply speech session, both teams will be given 1 minute as preparation time before making their respective reply speeches. At the 3rd minute of reply speech time, the bell will be rung once. In the 4th minute, the bell will be rung twice to indicate that the time for the reply speech has ended. While the debater is speaking, the opposition team can apply POIs in the form of question, statement, facts, explanation, or corrections. The opposition teams are allowed to turn the microphone on or raise hand and papers to alert the speaker for POIs. No POIs are allowed during the reply speech session. If the debater loses internet connection during the debate, the debaters are given 10 minutes to return to the debate session. If the debater loses internet connection, when the debater successfully returns to the debate session, the debater can continue the debate where they stopped and there are no deduction marks. If the debater is unable to enter the room after 10 minutes, the next debater from the opposition team will continue the debate session. Debaters are reminded to ensure internet access is available and in good condition for the smooth running of the debate session. Victory will be awarded to the team that gets a majority vote from the panel of adjudicators. The decision of the panel of adjudicator is final. To open the case from the government team, I call upon the Prime Minister to start the debate session.
Okay, so first of all, can I be heard?
Yes.
Okay, secondly, I'll be taking my POIs in chat. All right, so I'll be starting my speech in 3.
1 second.
Okay, sure.
Okay, wait, Muiz, I cannot find your name.
Okay, I apologize. So I think when I'm speaking, you can see, okay, yeah, right.
Yep, you can go.
Okay, so I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2,
1.
Okay, all right. So I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. The advent of the Save Ralph film, when it came to light, portrayed the harsh reality behind animal testing. And here in government, we're going to prove 3 things to you. Firstly, is why is it that animal testing is morally abhorrent and principally unjustifiable? Secondly, we're going to answer the question of who better get scientific research done and bring you a comparative between government and opposition. And then thirdly, we're going to answer the question of who best caters to public backlash, assuming the instance that Save Ralph happens on both sides of the house in this debate for today. Now, before I go further into those questions, there are some groundwork that I want to make. There are 3 points of characterization that I want to make, and then 1 point of counterfactual, also known as mechanization, in what the world on our side looks like. So first point of characterization that I want to make is, what is scientific research? So right now in status quo, scientific research is assumed to be the most efficient when you use animal testing. This is seen as evidence when you have all the COVID vaccines, such as Pfizer, using animal testing as some form of metric to determine whether that whether the scientific research is proven or whether that vaccine is safe. So we don't necessarily think that's true, and I'll explain later in my argument. Second point of characterization I want to make is regarding animals. There are 2 points here. Firstly, I want to clarify is that animals don't necessarily represent the greatest picture of what humanity can be. The fact that they're different in terms of species and that by itself already shows that there is no great mirroring on what effect vaccines or medicine towards animals can do and how that reflects on humans. For example, you already have animal testing in terms of curing cancer. We have successfully cured cancer in certain animals. However, when we try to replicate that into humans, it doesn't necessarily work. So the idea behind animal testing being the most prevalent and the most used metric in determining the safety of certain scientific research, we think is not as correct. And I'll explain that later in my argument. Thirdly, is the film of Save Ralph by itself. I think what's most important to acknowledge is the fact that Save Ralph might not necessarily represent the most true aspect of the medicine industry or any scientific research in that instance. But what's the most important takeaway here is the fact that it is the image in which it portrays to the people, and it reaches out to people's empathy rather than logic. This means that community backlash is guaranteed to happen, and that is a problem that both sides in this house needs to cater to in this debate. Okay, now then, panel, I want to talk about the counterfactual that will come from government. What is the world going to look like without animal testing in scientific research? There are 4 parts here. Firstly, is the fact that we heavily emphasize the use of theories, conjectures, and most importantly, computer calculation, such as the use of quantum computing and those systems that allow for individuals to have good scenario or circumstances that can be replicated within the system that can basically reflect on what can happen. But highlight panel how this is just as arbitrary as animal testing, because both sides is not necessarily confirmed unless you bring in human testing. The second layer here is the fact that we do acknowledge that without the use of animal testing, we are willing to use small-scale human testing. For example, when using the COVID-19 vaccine, for example, to test it, we are willing to use a small set of humans to replicate and to ensure the safety of that vaccine. Thirdly, panel, is the fact that third and last actually is the fact that we are willing to fund research through alternative measures of scientific research. For example, the use of cloning human cells to see how certain medicine will react to that human cell without necessarily the use of humans themselves, or also the use of animals in between. So why is this mutually exclusive on our side, panel? Is because the access to animal testing is very easy, such that once you have that option in front of you, you are guaranteed to almost always take that for granted, and you don't see any other alternatives that can actually be viable. For that reason, we believe that funding can actually happen more on our side, and Amma will explain that later in his speech. So now then, panel, I've given you the contextualization, characterization, as well as the counterfactual for our side. Now, my argument is basically why animal testing is principally abhorrent and morally unjustifiable. Now, there are 3 parts here. Firstly, I want to talk about, in principle, it is the fact that the act of animal testing by itself is already torturing animals in a way that you don't give them any other alternatives, number one. But number 2 is the fact that it doesn't necessarily bring you the desired outcome that you want. What does this mean? This means that by having animal testing, you do test your vaccines on animals. However, at the end of the day, you still need to do human testing. That means animal testing is just one part in a long process of determining the scientific research and its effectiveness. That means ultimately, panel, this is one step that is not as necessary because it doesn't guarantee the outcome that you want to claim for it to have. So that is incredibly important, because what we're essentially doing is not giving any form of guarantee to these animals, but you would actually torture them when it's completely unnecessary. And we think by that instance, it's already morally unjustifiable. Now then, panel, I want to move it to the second circumstance, or let's assume the best case scenario for their side, in which animal testing does happen and it does work. Why then is it still principally abhorrent? It's because it is unjustifiable in catering to animal rights by itself. To better understand this argument, panel, I want to bring to you a morally an assumed morally unjustifiable action that humans do, but is something that we justify by ourselves through logic. And that is the use the image of putting people or criminals in prison. Why do we believe that putting criminals in prison is justified? It's because it goes onto the fundamental basis of human rights and life. That means that every individual that lives have some form of rights. However, a criminal can be put into prison because that criminal has taken away the right of another permanently. For example, that criminal murders another. That means that that right is taken away from them. Now, because of that, we justify the act of putting someone into prison, which is essentially torture by itself. The conclusion that I want to make here, panel, is the fact that if we take that scenario and we put it onto animals, it is unjustifiable to torture animals because they have done nothing wrong to us and they can do nothing wrong to us. And it is unjustifiable for us to put them into circumstances where they have no other alternatives to succumb out of. Now then, panel, the third layer is, why is this principle so important? Because firstly, it teaches human restraint and not to be overly assertive in their actions of human testing as well as animal testing. Why is this so? What is the outcome that could happen if this principle is actually pushed away and we don't accept this? This happens in which ultimately, if in the circumstance that animals mutate further and further away from humans, that there is no other reason to actually experiment on animals, would you then, as opposition, actually commit human testing on innocent animals, on innocent humans, because that is essentially what you're doing to these animals? Because of these three reasons, panel, I have never been prouder to propose. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that speech. To open the case from the opposition team, I call upon the leader of opposition to continue the debate session.
Hello, testing, testing.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay then. Right, so I'll begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. So a very good morning to the judges and the government side and everyone else. So on this evening, we'll be debating on the motion the House regrets the use of animals in scientific research. So we agree with the definitions given by the Prime Minister. However, we would like to correct him on one thing, is the fact that yes, animals does not mirror a human body system. However, it does come close to it. For example, if we want to test a medicine for a human, we would test it on mammals instead of reptiles or fishes. And at the same time, we would also like to emphasize that scientific research is usually done for the sake of new discovery and results. However, the problem right now is that you see the animal testing does not necessarily. The problem is that with animal testing is that it does not necessarily with animal testing itself, rather than a policy of like having to retest the same ingredients or chemicals over and over again. Like for example, when another company has already proven that that particular ingredient or chemicals was already in fact safe to use. So for example, China's previous policy is one example. Whenever like a company wants to introduce their product in China's market, it was compulsory for companies to produce results that says, hey, this product is safe for humans to use. So and only then would they be able to sell their products and gain profit from the China market. Now, however, because penetrating China's market is so profitable, many companies decide not to go cruelty-free despite so many pressure and boycott attempts are made on their products. However, companies can make choices that can reduce or eliminate the need for continuous animal testing. For example, like only new ingredients in products are required to testing. However, if a companies stick to like old formulations or combinations of chemicals that have been previously been safely tested, then there's no further testing required. Therefore, like we will be eliminating the amount of animal test. Decreasing the number of animal testing that we would have to make. So as the opposition, we strongly oppose the motion. But before that, I would like to introduce the opposition side first. As the opposition leader, I will be giving the rebuttals and one argument for our side, which is animal testing contributes to life-saving cures and treatments. My deputy leader of opposition will also be giving rebuttals and 2 points, which are animal testing does not only benefit humans, but it may potentially benefit other animals as well. And that animal research is highly regulated with laws in place to protect animals from mistreatment. So, and then my opposition whip speaker will rebut and sum out our case. So I will now give my rebuttals against the Prime Minister. So the Prime Minister has said how they would use cloned human cells to instead to do testing on new medicines or products. However, the technology to use cloned human cells aren't quite there yet. If you're talking about literally like separate individual cells, it doesn't exactly replicate the whole organ body system, which is way more complicated. And then I would like to point out how the government also had stated their plans to instead use testing on prisoners. However, the value of life does not necessarily increase for criminals. That's why there are people who oppose the death sentence and who prefer if prisoners are given the chance to be integrated back into society. So now, right, so for my main point, which is animal testing contributes to life-saving cures and treatments. So when introducing a new product for the general public to use, we first have to consider how it will affect people's health and the environment. Will there be negative effects if we accidentally swallow it or if we pour it down the drain? How effective is a medicine if a patient takes it? So there's a lot of factors we have to consider when it comes to consuming anything that is not organic. Like let's take like an obvious example right now. An example that was used a bit by the Prime Minister, like for COVID, right? For the COVID-19 pandemic. So about a year ago, there was so much pressure for vaccines to be created, and guess what? Animal testing play a huge role in determining whether the vaccines made by the pharmaceutical companies are safe or not to be used on humans. Yes, it was just maybe the early phases, but it was because of that first phase that we can continue to the second phase, which was human testing. And so I would like to emphasize how, like, because of those animal testing, the pharmaceutical companies are able to produce vaccines in such a short period of time, and this has saved billions of lives from being affected and dying from COVID-19. So this COVID-19 example that I'm giving is just one beneficial example of animal testing. You imagine how great of an impact it would be if we also consider medicines for animals and maybe chemical treatments for plants. So you see, when you look at the big picture, animal testing in scientific research is done for the greater good of not just the humanity, but for the whole environment and the animal world too, by extension. And so to sum up my speech is that I've given the main point, which was animal testing contributes to life-saving cures and treatments because at the end of the day, it benefits the greater good of everyone. And that's it. Thank you.
Okay. I would like to thank the speaker for their speech. To continue our debate today, I call upon the Deputy Prime Minister to continue the case for their side. Amar.
Hi, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay.
One second,
See
let
me
me
as well,
put on
right?
the timer for you.
Before I start my speech, there's a few things to point out. My pronouns are he, him. I'll be taking POIs verbally. I probably won't be paying attention to chat. One moment. Let me just adjust my camera. Okay. So I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. If there's one thing we can agree on during this entire debate is that we want what's best for humanity and for all the parties involved, including the animals. Right? We want to be able to create new developments in science and technology. We want to create new discovery that can solve sicknesses both in humans and in animals. The question then becomes, after decades of history of doing animal testing, of using animals as essentially lab rats, torturing them, can we still justify it sufficiently enough to say that, hey, you know what? We want to sacrifice them 100% for the sake of our betterment, especially in a world where there are alternatives? So in my speech, here are a few things I'm going to do. First of all, I'm going to bring in a number of rebuttals in the case brought up by Leader of Opposition. Then I'm going to explain about the world of alternative ways for drug and vaccine testing, including testing for other minor products such as beauty products, so on and so forth. I will explain how its development is in status quo. I will explain how we can better it under our world in a way upon which the public backlash cannot bring any significant change in the world of opposition. So let's start with a number of rebuttals. Leader of Opposition said that number one, the problem when it comes to these research animals is the having to retest. Now, I'll concede this much. Retests happen a lot, right? And I'll also concede the fact that yes, in the past, animal testing has proved pivotal in number of academic advances. But here's another thing I'm going to say. How can you justify with absolute certainty that, hey, we're going to test this product on an animal? If this animal dies, it's okay, so long as, you know what, we can just make a new one, prototype number 2, move on with life. Especially in a world where there are alternatives. So let's talk about these alternatives. Now, Moise brought up the idea of making synthetic tissue. Now, the truth is that technology already exists. There already are. So there's a theory that you can use stem cells to create some form of flesh or a particular segment of an organ. This same stem cell research has been used to create, as far as I know, an ear that is exactly the same as a human ear in terms of its in terms of its molecular structure. Now, essentially, what this can be used for is two things. Number one, testing of specific drugs in regards to that particular organ or that particular system. In many cases, many diseases work based on that concept. Not, oh, you know what, disease going, antibody dead, finish. No, never works in that. It never works in that way, and that is simply scientifically wrong. But the problem does occur. Now, in opposition's world, where animal testing has become so prominent, and even to an extent in status quo, when animal testing exists, there is absolutely zero incentive for any further development in any of these alternative methods. Now, why is this development important? Because for one, because we have only ever used animal testing, we don't know the limits of our technological capability as we are now. Which means for all we know, we could already have a way to cure cancer, but because we are still using animal testing as our primary method, we are not getting anything from it. On the topic of cancer, to emphasize the point that the difference in biology in regards to animals and humans, let's take an example of a research done, I believe it was in 1990s to 2000s, where a drug was developed that could cure cancer in a certain animal. However, when applied to humans, it caused upwards of 20 different deaths. The difference is there. Now, there are many drugs, especially drugs that are related to either the heart or brain stimuli that don't work on humans but work on animals. So one thing we can say for absolute certainty is the success rate that we get from testing animals is not proportional to human safety in any measure at all, right? That's number one. So again, this emphasizes the point of importance. Number two, let's talk about the protection of animals, right? Now, the absolute best case scenario in terms of what we have now in opposition's world is that because of the video, people go up in an uproar in regards to animal change. The best that can do in opposition's world is create legislative changes to make animal testing significantly more stricter to secure these animals. But here's why I say that is completely useless. Even with the acts that are going to be put into place or already existing legal means to protect these animals, in most places those basically don't happen. Now, as far as I know, there was a research done in the US where I think 400 to 500 different laws were violated in terms of animal testing. And what we are doing by saying that, hey, you know what, you can animal test as long as it's beneficial for us, is we are blurring the line between testing for the sake of necessity and testing for the sake of, oh, we can, so let's do it. Now, why is it important to make that distinction? Because humans are governed based on our ethics to a very large extent. We are considered one of the most powerful species here because of our number one population, because of our intelligence. If by any circumstance we create a world where we can take advantage of any other being on this planet, that's simply morally and ethically wrong. And that also leads to the point how many countries doesn't actually allow for animal testing to happen because its legislation is based on some religion that disallows that particular activity. So in essence, in those countries, animal testing doesn't happen. Now let's look at how exactly we can develop these alternatives to be very significant forces in the world of medicine. And that is in regards to the Ralph video. Now, public backlash is bound to happen. And it is like opposition said, the technology that we can use as alternatives are very minimal, but the technology already does exist. There are many computer systems that already use brain stimuli to sort of predict how a human brain operates to a certain extent. The problem is a lack of funding. In our world, what we can do is create a world in which people will undoubtedly go up in arms about this animal quote-unquote abuse in both worlds. That is not something that is mutually exclusive to one side. right? So when people go up in arms, that can become an incentive to create legislative change in terms of finding an alternative in terms of technology and science that we can then use to further our research, to further our medical capability. This does a couple of things. Number one, it reduces animal cruelty significantly, particularly in the world of medicine. Number two, it creates a world where we can explore much, much further in terms of our capability, therefore making it possible to create these vaccines and these cures and these drugs that help people a lot more effectively and perhaps even a lot more quickly. Now, the advantage of this is obviously the fact that this is going to create better healthcare scenario. This is going to create a world where people can react better. Now, all of this taken into consideration, where we have a direct mechanization of how exactly we are going to develop our world, how exactly alternatives can be immensely great, there is absolutely zero justification for using animal testing in such a large scale in labs like this, where they are tortured, where they are hurt, where they are used as lab rats and then left to die the moment the experiment is over, because that is exactly what happens, contrary to whatever it is that opposition is saying. And that leads to the most important point here. If we have an alternative, we as human beings should in no way endorse something that is essentially already dying. We cannot trust this system as fully in terms of determining its medical effects, much less its long-term effects. We cannot trust this system because, for one, we have shown that while the biologies are very similar, there is no 100% guarantee, and that still poses a risk to humans. The comparative is that in our world, we are creating a scenario where we can create 100% efficiency, can create a world where we can create much better circumstances for our people and for advancing in the world of science. That's it. I rest my case.
Okay, thank you so much, Amar. Now I call upon the Deputy Leader of Opposition to continue the case for their side. Just come near.
So what side, Gov?
Okay. You can begin it.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are. You can start whenever you're ready, okay?
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, members of the floor. Today's motion is this House regrets the use of animals in scientific research. First and foremost, I'd like to rebut the second speaker from the government team. He has mentioned that there are already technologies that already exist nowadays that can help combat against this kind of that can help create that can help be much more accurate, but the technology is not there. And we on the opposition side, we are trying to say that animal testing has been of great forefront. The technology is not there because it's such an advanced technology that it's trying to be very optimistic, and it's trying to be too optimistic to the point where we right now, for instance, like let's take my opposition leaders example of COVID. We need the vaccines and medications right now. So trying to wait for a technology that doesn't exist right now will create a much immense problem. And even if the problem is okay, it's from starting from the animal testing, and then starting from animal testing, and then we go to human testing. And of course, on the opposition side, we do believe the narrative that there is no 100% success rate. But it's better than having no data at all, trying to just immediately test something on human. Imagine the numbers of humans are going to get maybe sick or maybe deaf because of this kind of testing that has not been done beforehand. So we on the opposition side, we believe that it is deemed necessary. And the problem with and to rebut on the problem of inhumane or what is it called, being unmorally, it goes to my second point, which is animals research has been highly regulated. Okay. Animal research has been highly regulated in the sense that there are laws and regulations that are in place to protect these animals from mistreatment or inhumane experiments, and there's also an organization, as far as I know, an organization that controls saying which and what kind of animal testing can be approved. And even though the second speaker from the government side has said that these laws do not matter, but we can try to maybe we can try to make a stricter law, because this kind of testing can help. This type of testing uh, this type of testing must be approved beforehand.
POI?
So hold on. So animals must be used in the case where it's the ethical consideration whether is it more ethical to do it on human or to do it on animals. Because the problem, like I said before, if we're testing something, just a completely foreign vaccine on humans, what would happen on the human's life that are being tested on? When testing medicines for potential toxicity, the lives of human volunteers should not be put into dangers unnecessarily. It would be completely unethical in that sense, because we are testing more on human than animals. And the focus of animal testing is to improve the human's quality life. And because of the laws and regulation being put in place, we believe this is not just done by neglecting the animal's welfare. uh, test subjects Test subjects or the animals will be well taken care of uh, throughout the research period. And because of the lack of technology and the unrealistic optimism that is on the government side, we believe that animal testing is a foundation. It creates a big foundation for for like vaccines, medicines, and whatnot. To go on to my second point, animal
Before that,
testing does not only benefit. Yeah, sure.
okay. So if human testing was to have rules and regulation that allows the magnitude of harm to be inflicted, would you allow human testing?
That's the thing. We're not allowing human testing. Human testing is basically okay. Let me rephrase myself. The thing about animal testing, like you have said, is the first stage of a test, and then it goes to humans. And human testing, even with regulation, let's take a real life example of the AstraZeneca uh, vaccine. It's considered a testing because the government has been testing it on like a first try on humans, seeing how it affects Malaysian, and people are volunteering for those kind of tests because they believe that the vaccine is worth enough to combat the issue of COVID. And to go on to my second point, animal testing does not only benefit the human, it may also potentially benefit other animals as well. This is done so it could potentially better help the entire ecosystem. Diseases such as cancer in animals or potentially viruses and infectious diseases. These testing are not just mutually inclusive just for humans. It could potentially help other animals as well. Scientists can create medications and cures. So we are allowing ourselves to help save an entire species from extinction due to an unknown disease. We want to see, because animal testing may bring benefit to the human, but you could, like I said, may bring benefit to the human, but it can also help other animals as well. We want our children to be able to see animals at the zoo, not only in books, right? So this is a necessary time for animal to be tested during a dire situation. And to summarize my point, animal testing, there are rules and regulation to help protect this animal from mistreatment. And And after all of those, and after the fact, animal testing does not only benefit the humans, but it can also benefit the animals themselves. And I'm proud to propose. Thank you.
Thank you to the speaker for their remarks, ladies and gentlemen. The honorable educator. I shall now call upon the government whip to rebut.
Before I start, uh, everyone can hear me, right?
Yes.
Okay,
Okay.
cool. Okay, thanks. Okay, so I'm gonna start my speech in 3, 2. Okay, so I'm gonna start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Okay, panel. I think ultimately this debate comes down to two fundamental questions. Firstly, whether the morality behind these acts of torture is justified, or what opposition would like to claim as utilitarianism and somehow bring along a soft case of helping animals along the way, which is not entirely clear on why that's true when you're essentially torturing them. But secondly, is the idea of effectiveness of scientific development, as well as what the future could potentially look like with and without, with the potential backlash that could happen as a result of animal testing and people protesting. So let's answer the first question in terms of morality in animal testing. What did they tell you on their side? The best case that I can sum up for their side is the fact that you allow for animal testing purely because it benefits humanity and that allows for it to be justified. When I asked the POI if this was to be similarly applied to humans, if human testing was to have rules and regulations, much like you have for animals, would you allow that? He says no, because animal testing allows for humans to have benefit and you don't want that to happen. And then he further went to tell you that animal testing is just one step in a large step of process. So the question is, it's clear now that on both sides of the house, our current ability to determine the scientific development is arbitrary at best. What does that mean? This means that animal testing cannot guarantee 100% the effects that it has on humans. Like symmetrically on our side, you have the use of computing, you have the use of theories, you have the use of calculations, which will further extend into cloning cells that no one necessarily has to take harm to. Both of these are arbitrary in determining the outcomes of that scientific development. So I think the proper question to ask then, panel, is which side has the greater potential to further develop and further get investment and allow for better scientific development to happen. I'll explain that later in my second clash. But going back to the first clash, why is this utilitarian system that they're trying to promote on their side morally flawed? This is because they condone the act of abusing the rights of animals, even with rules and regulation, which I don't think it at all is necessarily effective, because corporations have the money and corporations can bribe certain politicians, or if they're not bribing, then they can lobby certain politicians to always support these companies in whatever acts they do. This already happens in status quo. I don't see how rules and regulation can necessarily help, right? But assuming then, if it still does happen, that rules and regulation are implemented, the moral backlash still happens because the video still exists within status quo anyway. It's not necessarily true the fact that Save Ralph is is objectively good or is objectively true. It's just perception that people has from that video. That means that people see this as morally unethical. People see this as something that is not necessarily necessary to be condoned. So we think in those circumstances, utilitarian doesn't help if it allows for the community to override their morality. That means on their side, in terms of principle, they are willing to allow for innocent human testing because that is like what they are supporting on their side. They are going to allow for testing on heinous criminals and heinous acts, and they are willing to torture those individuals because they've already taken that one step of disregarding their morals for supporting animals. We think this is incredibly problematic because this allows for humanity to throw away what fundamentally makes humanity the most intelligent being in this earth. This allows for humanity to always prioritize your rationale. We don't think utilitarianism works in this instance because not everyone will support it. Not everyone is willing to accept the help that you're going to talk about on your side. It doesn't matter if all COVID vaccines have animal testing on it. If people are unwilling to take it purely because they believe that animal testing is immoral, then it doesn't help those humans when they die. We think in those instances, utilitarianism doesn't help, and that is morally unjustifiable. So now then, panel, I want to talk about the second clash in this debate in terms of who better has development for scientific research? Now, let's look at status quo and what they have in opposition and what they told us. They told us that right now, the reason why you have COVID vaccines that are so effective is because you can have animal testing. This is false. The reason why they can follow that line of argumentation is because animal testing happens in status quo anyways. It's like saying that back then when religion was 100% and everyone was very religious, people always donated. But no, that's because religion was a thing back then. So the proper question to ask here, panel, is in the instance in which animal testing was taken away from the option, would COVID vaccine still occur on an effective rate nowadays? And we think the argument is yes. We think the answer is yes, because you cut out one unnecessary step in a series of steps. You cut out this totally irrelevant idea of animals, and now you can apply to a small set of humans and get data from that immediately, and that can then be put into our mechanism of going through calculations, and that ultimately helps. We think that's incredibly important, and we think that's what's actually going to allow for COVID vaccines to actually occur better, because you don't need to take this extra step of ensuring human safety when humans are never 100% guaranteed to be safe anyway. But let's assume the best case scenario on their side. Let's wipe the slate clean. Let's wipe the slate clean and assume that both sides have the same instance. Both sides, I've stated before, is morally insignificant in determining the outcomes. So going back into the idea of human backlash, why is it then on our side is far better? The short answer is the fact that it allows for the development of industries that otherwise would have not been tapped into. Let's look at the potential that animal testing can have. The best that they can have is animal testing now, animal testing 10 years in the future, animal testing 100 years in the future, because humans are always so scared to put themselves in harm's way. When on our side, we are willing to put away that ability or that view of always approach animals first before you approach humans. That opens up a more developed industry for you to look into technology that otherwise wouldn't have. So now, panel, engaging with our best case scenario and the substantial outcome from our side, if this technology, if this view was to be the view that people adopted since the 1980s, then we think technology and the alternative to animal testing would have been far more developed, far more greater, and nobody really had to take any damage from that. This occurs better in status quo with the video of Safe Ralph, because people are more open to the idea of going against this animal testing, and people are more willing to fund animal testing alternatives, and that allows for the further increase in development or the further increase in speed that allows for vaccinations, for medication to happen on a far greater scale. For those reasons, panel, I'm incredibly proud to propose. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Muiz, for that rebuttal. It is now time to listen to the rebuttals of the opposition whip.
Hello, am I
Mr.
audible?
Tanadum? Yes.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
All right, so I'll just like to make it clear that I will be taking POIs in the form of verbal notes instead of chat, because I won't be looking at chat.
Okay. Tell me when
And-
you're ready,
right.
okay? Tell me when
All
you're
right,
starting.
so I will start in 3, 2, 1. Throughout this debate, what side government has mentioned is that animal testing is an unnecessary step in a process of developing a certain product. And so what side government has tried to mention is that we have what animal testing is, it is a unnecessary step, and instead what side government wishes to do is to take these certain steps in, and such as funding computer calculations, computer research, all these theories and simulations. What we have to say to that is that at the end of the day, a product must be tested on a living product. What side government intends to do is to put humans in harm's way first. And so what side government has to understand is that until such a discoveries, what the government has to understand is that nothing so far has been discovered that can be a viable and optionable substitute for the complex functions of a living, breathing, whole organ system with pulmonary and circulatory structures like those in humans and animals. And so until such a discovery, animals they will always be a vital role, and they must continue to play a critical role in helping researchers test these potential new life-saving products. And so site government also mentioned the use of computer simulations and other methods to replace animal testings. And so animals are, what I must say to that is, animals are vital for many areas of research linked to human health. So the study of regeneration in complex organs like in the liver or spinal cord is not just one that can be used as of right now, that it can't be simply put in use in computer simulations. It simply cannot be simulated. And so even with these computer simulations, theories and calculations, it is still not a viable outcome because of what I mentioned earlier. And so studying cell cultures in a petri dish, while sometimes useful, it does not necessarily provide the opportunity to study these interrelated processes occurring in the functional body of an animal or a human. And so what site government failed to realize is the contribution of these animals towards the betterment of humanity, and also towards the animal kingdom. For example, the use of insulin was first found in dogs. The use of stem cell was found in a zebrafish. So what all these animals have contributed to us is simply cannot and will not ever be replicated by the use of computer functions. And so now comes the argument of morality, right? And so when we argue that the morality of testing animals is not right, but on-site government, they instead wish to start testing on and on human subjects. So these create, obviously this argument is not valid, because why would you put as site government mentioned, humans will and always will be the number one species on Earth. And so with our inability to carry out certain tests and our functions, why would we put ourselves at risk when we can put these animals to use? And so the argument of morality has always been a prevalent argument, because even back in ever since the start of time, humans, what difference does it make that activities such as farming and using animals as a mode of transport, what difference does all that is compared to animal testing? So animals do not have the ability, obviously do not have the cognitive ability or the moral judgment that humans do, and because of this they
POI?
have been treated differently. No thank you. Treated differently than humans by nearly every culture throughout recorded history. And so the argument that if we granted animals rights, so humanity would obviously not the relationship between humans and animals would obviously be affected for the worst of times, because the relationship between humans and animals is that obviously humans throughout the start of time has taken advantage of animals, right? For their skin, for their fur, for meat, and for their byproducts as well. And so what difference does it make that the use of animal testing could be implemented in the same way or the same idea? So the argument of morality, right, ladies and gentlemen, from side government is that we would like to stop animal testing. We do not appreciate what the animals have done, and we do not appreciate the contribution of these animals in the development and research of these products. And so what they have completely misunderstood is that, these animals and these animals contribution uh, are not relevant enough in the field of science. And so what they plan to do is, obviously, as they mentioned, start by pouring funding towards computer simulations, towards these theories and towards these simulations. But at the end of the day, all these advancements in science that we have that humanity has counted through in the past hundreds of years has always been through the use of animal testing. And so don't seem to concede to the fact that animal testing has been has been the best option in testing all these products. And so the contribution of these animals must be again put into consideration. And so when animal testing exists, there these other alternatives will still be there, but at the end of the day, it is still not a viable option. And so they also mentioned that some of the drugs that we have used do not work with humans, but work with animals. Obviously, that is the case because it is called animal testing. So at the end of the day, they do not consider the fact that some of these products will be successful. And so we excuse me. And so the protections of animals is useless because in most places it doesn't happen. And what we would have to say is that these laws and regulations are already in place, and it would reduce the abuse of animals. And so we would like to oppose.
Okay, thank you for the speech. Now that we have heard all three speakers from both teams, we shall take a short break of 1 minute. During this time, both the government and the opposition teams will prepare their reply speech. The time of 1 minute has ended. I shall now invite the opposition leader from the opposition team to deliver the reply speech. Miss Michi?
Right. Thank you, moderator. So hello. I'll be starting now in 1, 2, 3.
Oh, wait, 1 second. Can I have the timer first? Right. Okay. You can start whenever you want. Okay.
Okay, 1, 2, 3. Hello and good evening, everyone. So for the opposition side, all our three arguments, which are animal testing contributes to life-saving cures and treatments, and that it does not only benefit humans, but it may potentially benefit other animals. On top of that, animal research is highly regulated with laws in place to protect animals from mistreatment. So all of our arguments actually lead up to one important goal, which is for the greater good of everyone, not just for the sake of humanity, but for the sake of animals and the environment too. So we believe that the government's vision of the world is so idealistic. I would like to point out that the government's plan to use new technologies have been purely theoretical. They haven't given any solid examples of another form of testing that completely replaces animal testing. They kept saying how they will encourage funding and push the implementation of the technology to replace the current animal testing. But their best case scenario is that this will only take place in the far future. So the government have failed to realize how the current world actually works. For example, the COVID-19 pandemic came out of nowhere. It threw the world into panic and chaos. We were so unprepared for it. So do you think we have the time to start using some other forms of testing in amidst of this panic to go out and protest against animal testing when we need to perform it for the sake of billions of lives? COVID-19 is just one example of sickness. In reality, we have to deal with new dangers, bio/chem threats every year, and we have to continue to do so in the future. On our side, however, we've already pointed out how countries are regulating animal testing so that unnecessary animal testings are not performed. So instead of trying to implement new tech, it's way more realistic to instead create a policy that gives animals that have been tested aftercare or limit the number of testing done on one animal. as opposition side, we have tackled this motion in our current reality, which is the fact that testing done on simulations or individual cells won't give the same result as animal testing. Testing on animals come close to replicating the reactions that humans would have. That's why scientific research keep using animal testing and not some fancy type that calculates and predicts in a purely theoretical way. Sure, we can use computers, but we'll end up resorting to testing on animals to see the actual facts. And with that, uh, the opposition side proud to oppose. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Ms. Michi. I shall now call upon the Prime Minister, Mr. Moise, from the government team to deliver their reply speech. Wait, let me just bring you in front.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, you can start whenever you're ready.
Right. Okay, can see me as well, right?
Yep.
Okay. So I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Regardless of what method we choose, the end goal of this debate is simple. Which side caters best to the advancement in terms of scientific and technological in both humanity and for animals? So here's what I'm going to do during my reply speech. Number one, I will show what exactly, however little opposition has contributed to this debate. I will show how we engage them and how we win this engagement. Let me start off by saying that first speaker of opposition said that, hey, you know what? Through scientific development, through animal testing, we can also help the animals. And yet opposition whip stated, you know what? We're going to let them suffer for our sake. So that's one already very blatant contradiction that's there. What does that tell us? It tells us that it is part of the reason why government takes this debate. Throughout this entire debate, opposition has engaged in absolutely no argument, has provided no mechanization on how their work can create a better world for world of medicine and for protecting the animals however they see fit. So here's what I'm going to do. Let's talk about the engagements that happened during this debate. First of all, also on the topic of ethics, which in essence was not engaged at all. We explained how ethics on our side can be completely moved from animal testing to human testing. We showed that because of the alternatives that we are presenting to advancement in technology, that can only happen in our world. The likelihood of failure is significantly less comparatively to opposition's world. We showed all of them, and we showed that how by doing what we do, we are able to maintain a good level of ethics to be good to all beings in this world at the same time advance. That point was completely not engaged by opposition, who kept on repeating the fact that, you know what, animal testing has good. On that note, it's probably very good to also point out the fact that at the start of this debate, we already considered that animal testing has helped us in the past. It has done a lot of good, it has also done a lot of bad. As per this motion, we are saying because of the bad, we don't want it at all. We regret ever thinking it was a viable option. And that is what we have done throughout this entire debate. Now let's look at some more engagements. The next was on the topic of alternatives, of how alternatives already exist and simply need more attention to be able to be what it could potentially be in regards to increasing our knowledge, increasing our capabilities in technology and in science. This point was also completely not engaged with at all from opposition, who kept on saying that this technology doesn't exist, when in truth, it already does, and in some departments, it is already being used, but it is being overshadowed by animal testing. We have shown how introducing alternatives can do two things. Number one, prevent animal cruelty within these labs, and number two, create a more efficient and effective system upon which the chance of failure for these drugs and for this medication is significantly less. Therefore, rather than testing on animals, we can already directly move on to human testing, which, by the way, is done with consent, with a very low chance of failure, therefore making our world much more reliable in terms of medication and vaccine. Chair, we have shown how backlash on our side can be used to create good monumental change in terms of science, in terms of technology, while side opposition has simply refused to engage in any of our arguments. We have shown how on our side we can weaponize public backlash into creating more advancements in science, while we have also shown how opposition's end, public backlash, the only thing it will do is create legislations will most likely will not be followed. Chair, in this debate, if you want to go with the side that limits us in terms of science and technology by using an archaic method that will end up hindering us in the long run, then go with side opposition. But if you want a side that does anything other than that, government takes this debate. Thank you, and I'm very proud to propose.
Thank you. We have now come to the end of the debate. Debaters are asked to remain in this room while waiting for the adjudicator to make a decision. Adjudicator are reminded to move to the adjudicator discussion room. Okay, wait. With that, the House of Parliament is adjourned. Thank you.
Excuse me. How many minutes do I have before I can give my verdict?
You can have up to 15 minutes.
Up. So that means I can give the verdict less than 15 minutes.
Yes,
Just give
whenever
me
you're ready.
one. All right.
Okay.
Is government team ready to receive the verdict? Hello.
Yes, government is here and ready.
Opposition team, ready?
Yep, we're ready.
Uh, so before I give my verdict and a few comments, I just want to say congratulations to both teams for being willing to join this debate tournament. I'm sure it's going to provide an insightful experience and also provide you exposure and also experience in terms of varsity debating. And I hope you continue to debate and try to enter like more tournaments in the future. And I also want to congratulate both teams for providing a very good debate. I think that both arguments put forth by both sides were very, I would say, um, very logical and also very practical. And I think I really value those arguments because it's important for us to really understand how these arguments play out in real life, right? So without further ado, on the motion, in light of the short film Save Ralph, this house regrets the use of animals in scientific research. The motion stands and government wins today's debate. I'm going to provide you with very brief reasons on why I think government won this debate. But if you would like to like receive further clarification or like further explanation, or if you just want to simply discuss things on the motion, right, you can simply contact me. I'll provide you with my number or something after this. So like first thing, right, when you look at the motion, it's a regret motion. So this is something for both teams. If you know, it's good, but if you don't know, it's very important for us to be able to analyze and compare counterfactuals, right? So that's why I think government did right when they first talked to you about how like they gave us a picture of how both worlds would look like, one where you actually allow animal testing and one which you do not. And you have to understand that this is a very simple thing to do. Like whenever you have a regret motion, all you have to do is analyze and explain both worlds and just argue why is one preferable over the other, right? So that hence you regret the other one. So a second thing I want both teams to note is that be careful of the wording of the motion, right? Because although I think like both sides give really good arguments on why you actually want to have or you don't want animal testing, I think the wording of the motion itself, the spirit of the motion, right, wants us to talk more about how like how public perception is towards animal testing. And again, I think government did this quite well, in which they talk about how it's very likely that public backlash would happen because so that means that this debate is not a general debate about animal testing, right? So this debate has to like be on the assumption that like there's a reason why you have this debate, you know. And um it's very likely for us to assume that public backlash is going to happen. And I think it's necessary for opposition to actually go on and try to address this, you know, like aside from just giving the normal arguments on why animal testing is necessary or why it's important or efficient. And then what else, I think it's also important for opposition to give a more like to be principally consistent, you know, because I think you have to like decide what's the threshold or what's the limit you guys are actually going to concede, like being okay with animal testing, right? Because you have to understand, like you have to be clear on which like which particular areas of animal testing are you actually okay with. So for example, like are you okay with animal testing even if it extends to like the cosmetics industry where a lot of like abuse happens on a large scale, or are you only like okay when it comes to like health reasons, for example? But this can also be said for government team as well. I think the debate would be much more clearer if you actually like explain how like animal testing actually occurs in different sectors. But I think the debate was still clear and was still a very good debate, so I didn't have much problems with that. um, I think for this brief session, that's all I want to say. But honestly, if you really want to know more about like regret motions in general, or you just want to like discuss more on this topic, like feel free to text me, and I'll be able to, you know, provide in-depth analysis on this. So yeah, that's all.
Hi,
All
I'm
right.
sorry. Could you put your
Yeah,
number or maybe your Discord in chat
yeah.
if possible? I'd like
I
to.
think I provided to the chairperson, and then she can
Okay.
convey it to me. Sure, sure.
Right. Thank you.
Or
Yeah.
you can just type it in the private chat
Okay, that
for
works
the
too.
speakers.
I just type the my WhatsApp number.
Okay.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
But really good debate,
Congratulations.
guys. And you know, to opposition, don't be disheartened. Relax. Still many more rounds to go. All right. So, good job, guys. Thanks
All
for the
right.
debate.
All right,
Thank you
thank
so
you
much, Mr.
guys.
Ajay.
Thank you, everyone.
Congratulations for both teams.
Okay,
Thank you
thank you
everyone for joining
everyone.
us today. We'll see you again next time on the second round. Goodbye.
Thank you, guys.
Thank
Thank
you
you,
Bye, Mr.
everyone.
everyone.